People long for leadership, not divisiveness, not finger pointing, not name calling. This is a tragedy. It's less than a day then after it occurred, and he can't refrain from his nasty, divisive habits.
His tweet wasn't even accurate as far as I'm concerned. That was a bipartisan law that was passed. You play into the hands of the terrorists to the extent you disrupt and divide and frighten people in this society.
And we expect to hear directly from the White House at a 3 p.m. briefing by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Also this hour, for the second day in a row, social media giants are getting grilled on Capitol Hill. As we begin our show, Facebook, Twitter, and Google are set to testify before the House Intelligence Committee to reveal more about Russia's online disinformation campaign. But let's start with New York City. NBC's justice correspondent Pete Williams joins us from our Washington bureau. Pete, getting into Saipov and what exactly he is telling authorities. We're hearing he's bragging from his hospital bed, not showing any remorse about that attack that left 8 people dead.
That's our understanding, that when authorities went into the hospital room last night after he'd been treated for the gunshot wound to the abdomen, they started asking him questions, and he wasn't responsive. He did talk to them, didn't answer their questions, but they said seemed unrepentant about the attack, bragging about it, being, as one official described it, smug about it.
Pete, self-radicalization, what's the word on that for Saipov?
That seems to be what happened here. There's no indication, we're told, of any contact with terrorists overseas. Doesn't seem to have been a directed attack from overseas, but rather an inspired attack. We know, as you reported earlier, that there was a note found at the scene near the truck that said ISIS will live forever, words to that effect written in Arabic. And secondly, they know that he had been consuming ISIS propaganda, looking at ISIS propaganda online, started doing so, they say, recently, but I don't know exactly what that means. The official I talked to about this wasn't sure when it actually started, but we've talked to neighbors who say they believe that as much as 2 years ago, he was showing an interest in this terror kind of propaganda. So what the big question here is, was there a turning point in his life that caused him to become interested in this? We don't know what that is. The authorities don't know what that is. But a corollary to all this is that he appears to have acted on his own. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to indicate so far that anyone helped him, directed him, encouraged him, or was aware of this. And of course, the cost of this would be very low. We think that he could have carried out this attack for $62.50. The $50 deposit he would have left on the truck, and the $12.50 toll he would have paid to cross the George Washington Bridge.
Pete, a moment ago you heard the president saying he would consider sending Saipov to Gitmo. We're hearing some lawmakers on the Hill saying that he should be treated as an enemy combatant. As far as we know right now, he hasn't been read his Miranda rights. How long does the government have before they need to make a decision one way or the other?
Yeah, the two separate issues here. So they don't have to read the Miranda rights courts have held in similar cases to be able to question someone and still use the evidence under what's called the public safety exception to the Miranda rule, which is a sort of judge court-made law that says if you're trying to find out if there's a danger to the community, and the question here is, was anybody else involved? Should they be worried about somebody else who was going to do something similar? They wouldn't have to give them Miranda warning. Eventually they will. The exact, it's not clear exactly how long. The longer you go, the riskier it gets legally. But in terms of sending him to Guantanamo Bay, I can tell you that there's no serious consideration being given to that. The Justice Department and the New York authorities have talked about this. Apparently, they've agreed that it's going to be a federal case. Charges, it could be filed as early today, but probably tomorrow. But there's a real question here about whether there would be even any legal authority to send him to Gitmo. But in any event, that doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
And this might be out of your purview. Why would the president throw that out there?
Well, I mean, he said before that perhaps terrorists should not be treated in the civilian courts. This is something that has been back and forth between Republican and Democratic administrations. But the fact that he's in the United States now, regardless of whether he's a citizen, the fact that he's here would make it much more complicated to send him to Gitmo, number one. And number two, not to get too technical for a moment, but he'd have to be declared an enemy combatant under the original congressional authorization for the use of military force after 9/11, which is all about Al-Qaeda, not ISIS. Now, you could argue that ISIS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, but there's no obvious immediate answer to that.
Pete Williams in our Washington bureau. Pete, thank you very much. And NBC's Craig Melvin, as you just saw, if you were watching this this channel last hour, is live on the scene in Tribeca, where police are just beginning to piece together this investigation. Craig, the cop who shot this gunman, deliberately did so, and he deliberately apparently did so by shooting him in the stomach so that he would survive this in order for investigators to be able to question him. So what more are New York officials saying about what they're learning and where the investigation stands right now?
What? They can shoot a motherfucker deliberately
that we just put on the screen there. He is being widely hailed as a hero. His name is Ryan Nash. He is 29 years old. We heard from some of his superiors during a news conference a few hours ago that he and his partner were out on patrol yesterday at a nearby high school. They got a call. They responded. They did what police officers are trained to do. They reacted quickly. He sprang into action, and he shot the suspect in the abdomen. And most have said that had it not been for those actions, the death toll certainly would have been higher.
How? He had toy guns. Who the fuck was he gonna kill with them shits?
A little bit more about the timeline during that news conference a few hours ago as well. Officials surmising at this point that at roughly 2:06 yesterday, the suspect rented that truck that Pete mentioned from Home Depot in New Jersey. After that, he got off the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan. It took him about 37 minutes with traffic, and then 3:04, he enters the bike lane not far from where I'm standing right now at the West and Houston streets. He was going, according to eyewitnesses, he was going perhaps 70 miles an hour. 4 minutes after he started, 911 calls started coming in from folks who were on the scene here, who were taken aback by what they were seeing, what they were hearing. So all of it went down fairly quickly, Katie.
Craig Melvin in Lower Manhattan. Craig, thank you very much. And President Trump wasted no time seizing on the attack and laying some of the blame squarely at the feet of Democrat and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. But 2 Republicans aren't having any of it.
I don't know that they bring out the best in our country.
Is it too soon to go after Senator Schumer?
And I don't know that's the way you bring out the best in our country, but everybody has their ways, I guess.
What would you have liked to see the president do after instead of that tweet against Schumer?
Well, I mean, express some solidarity with those who are trying to fix this program. I mean, or fix the situation. We shouldn't look for blame one day after like this.
NBC's Hallie Jackson joins me now from the White House. So the president's talking a lot, Hallie, about a diversity visa, and he's trying to say that the diversity visa is because of Chuck Schumer. Fact check, contextualize that for us.
So it's called the Diversity Visa Lottery Program, and it's a way for people to come into this country from places that don't have high immigration rates in the first place. I think we have a full screen to pull some of the stats up on this. This started back in 1989, 1990 from Senator Kennedy. Now, Chuck Schumer was in the House at the time. He did support this, but it was signed into law by a Republican president, George H.W. Bush, at the time. And then, in fact, a couple of years ago, when the Gang of Eight immigration bill was getting kicked around, it would have eliminated or dismantled this diversity visa lottery program. And you know who was part of that Gang of Eight? And somebody who worked on that was, of course, Chuck Schumer, as Jeff Flake, the person you just showed, pointed out online earlier today. So that is what this diversity visa lottery program does. It is our reporting here at NBC News that Saipov came into the United States under that lottery program, got essentially allowed into the country because of that. Now, I've been talking to administration sources this morning, one predicting that there will be a concerted effort to kill this thing. Republicans do not like it. They have not liked it. And in fact, getting rid of this was one of the president's immigration policy priorities that he rolled out last month when he was talking about what he wanted Congress to do on immigration and shift to this merit-based immigration system. Just a couple of hours ago, the president was at this cabinet meeting and this came up. Listen.
I am today starting the process of terminating the diversity lottery.
Can't even say that shit.
I'm going to ask Congress to immediately initiate work to get rid of this program. Diversity and diversity lottery. Diversity lottery. Sounds nice. It's not nice. It's not good.
Mr. President, do you want the assailant from New York sent to Gitmo? Mr. President?
I would certainly consider that.
So you've had the Gitmo conversation with Pete Williams. I would just note one other piece of this. When the president says he is starting the process of terminating this program, he can't do that unilaterally. He would have to work with Republicans over on the Hill, and that is what I expect Sarah Sanders to be asked about in just about 45 minutes from now.
Hallie, the reaction the president had immediately following this attack was a lot different than the reaction he had after the Las Vegas shooting, and this has followed something of a pattern of his reactions, the way he reacts to certain events and certain people behind certain events, and the way he reacts to others.
So I think it's what you're probably referring to is this question of tone and then policy, right? So you look at what the president tweeted out after, for example, the most recent, what you might call national tragedy. That was the Las Vegas mass shooting. You can see him here sending warmest condolences and sympathies, talking about what happened in Vegas. Now, in this instance, he also sent thoughts and prayers to those affected by this, as did his White House. But here's where the difference comes in. That is on policy. Immediately after the Las Vegas mass shooting, we sat in that briefing room, all of the White House reporters repeatedly asking the White House, asking our sources what the president planned to do from a policy perspective about, for example, bump stocks, right? That was the biggest legislative issue that had come up after the Vegas shooting. Repeatedly, the White House said, and the president himself, when we were out on the South Lawn as he was leaving for events, said this is too early to talk about it. Now is the time to grieve. Now is the time for mourning. It's not the time to talk about policy. In this instance, here we are. He's in the cabinet room talking specifically about policy, one of his signature policies, immigration, talking about wanting those changes. I asked Sarah Sanders the day after the Vegas shooting why the president, after Orlando, remember, during the campaign, talked about his travel ban, talked about policies immediately after that shooting, but after Vegas, he said it was too soon. She said there is a difference between being a candidate and being a president. Of course, notably now, Donald Trump is sitting in the cabinet room as president talking about this.
Hallie Jackson, thank you very much. Also, we should point out that the president has yet to call the two senators, both of whom are Democrats, from New York. And as of 11 a.m. this morning, the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, also Democrat, has not heard from the president. We'll update you if that changes. Turning now to Clint Watts, who is a former FBI special agent with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and a senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, also an MSNBC national security analyst, and Bill Gavin, a former Assistant Director for the FBI's New York Bureau. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Bill, we know that Saipov left a note inside of his truck that said ISIS lives forever. How do authorities get to the bottom of whether he's actually linked to the terror group or just inspired by it? And frankly, does it even matter?
I don't know. It does matter, I think, because when you look at how he got to the present set of circumstances that he finds himself in today, it matters how he got there. And I think that probably they will arrive at that conclusion when they finally peel down all the information that's on that computer, when they contact the number of people who they know they have to contact, both here and abroad. I think they'll probably figure it out. It appears that probably his radicalization came while he was in the United States. He's been here for a while, but that's yet to be determined fully. So it's very important to get to the bottom of why he wrote this, how he learned the Arabic to write what he did. All these things are very important at this particular point in time.
If he was radicalized here in the U.S. instead of having gone overseas and come back, what does that say to you? And how do you approach this differently if that is the case?
The first thing you're always looking for is connections back to the actual terrorist organization or others that have joined the fight overseas. And